Trail and Ultra Runners, what is going on? Welcome to another episode of the Koopcast. As always, I'm your host, Coach Jason Koop, and on this episode of the podcast, I have David Beeche, who is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director for the Ironman Group in the Oceania region, which means he is responsible for all of Ironman's events across Australia, New Zealand, and that area of the world, which include Ultra Trail Australia and the Tarawera Ultramarathons, which Ironman recently purchased. I wanted to bring Dave on the show today to discuss what Ironman's plans were for expansion. They are making a big splash in the trail and ultra running community, and I wanted to find out straight from the horse's mouth what that means for ultra runners of all different types across the entire planet. Dave has an impeccable finger on the pulse of the endurance community, having been an athlete and also a budding ultra runner as well. And we go through some of that history with his own personal ultra running and how Ironman initially started to get into the ultra running space. I had a lot of fun with this conversation. I hope you do too. Let's get right into it. Here's my conversation with Dave Beeche from Ironman. I think to kind of like start out with, since I've got predominantly a North American audience, why don't you just describe like what you do with Ironman and then what you've been doing with Ultra Trail Australia and with Tarawera since Ironman has acquired them?
Yeah, sure. So I look after the Australia and New Zealand region, makes up about 10% of our global business. And so while the name, the Ironman Group, might indicate we're predominantly a triathlon company, we're actually not. So we're a really diverse event company now. We deliver athlete experiences to over 1 million customers now every year. We operate in 56 countries, more than 250 events. So truly global presence. And our region is lucky enough in that it's treated as a bit of a petri dish for the globe. We've got the most diverse portfolio across triathlon, cycling, mountain biking, running, and trail running. And so I've been in this role about 5 years. I ran an event company in a partnership with another entity, and we got bought by Ironman, and sort of expected to be sent down the road when you get bought, but they offered me the role to run the region. So I lived in Australia for about 3 years and now back home in New Zealand. And so trail running, I've always loved running trail, and I'd done a few races over the course of a long sort of career as an endurance hack, I guess you'd call myself. And I was looking for a new challenge, and someone suggested I run Ultra Trail Australia. So it's sort of been in 2017 I did the event, and absolutely loved it. And not only the endurance experience itself in the race, but the community that was around it is really what struck me as something slightly different from the rest of our portfolio. And so following that, started a conversation with the owners, and then ended up buying the race 6 months later, and then that's really been the start of our strategy, I guess, in the ultra trail space, and then went on to buy Tarawera Ultra, and we've got another race here in New Zealand, and it's a pretty exciting and cool space to be operating. It's awesome.
I'm kind of giving a little bit of a chuckle because it's such a cliche way to fall into a business. It's like you go and you experience, you're like, hey, I want some of this action.
Yeah.
In your case, that was like convincing the brass at Ironman to go and buy this race, and perhaps even at that point, like launch a strategy, more of a broader strategy into the space of trail and ultra running.
Yeah, look, and I'm a little bit tongue-in-cheek because I mean the two are inextricably linked for me. Like I've been in the business now for 10, 15 years, and so when I can't differentiate, my personal endurance habits from what I do as a job, right? So whenever I'm doing races and taking part in whatever it be it mountain bike stage races or trail running, I can't take that lens off for what my job is, which is what I love doing. I'm in this space because we all are. Anyone working in events, you have to do it because you love it. And so, yeah, so look, going into having a look at Ultra Trail Australia, I was well aware that, you know, ultra trail running was experiencing a massive boom, and that it was a potential area of interest for us as a global company. But it did surprise me, the quality of the experience, and, you know, it was quite transformative for me, actually. It was awesome. So that was the icing on the cake behind some early thinking that had already been there.
Yeah, and I think that's when the trail and ultra running community looks at acquisitions like this. And as you're aware, I've had some people from Spartan on the podcast as well. When they look at larger companies kind of like foray into trail and ultra running, and I'm actually not sure if the sentiment plays true internet like as much internationally as it does domestically, but it does domestically, where they think, hey, I'm already having this great high quality experience. Why does Spartan, Ironman,
Yep.
the Wanda Group, whoever else, whatever other big organization, why do they have to like come in and, you know, like change this race? And from your perspective, it sounds like you changed very little because the experience was so high for you to start out with.
Yeah, it's a really valid question, and like, I get that all the time. And, you know, the big fear is that, you know, the Ironmans and others of the world are the big gorilla in the room, and they're going to come in and buy the event and cut the costs, put the prices up, and change the experience and try and corporatize it. And look, nothing could be further from the truth. We don't buy successful events because we want to stuff them up. We you know, our approach when we buy an event is take a very softly look and learn approach. And, you know, typically we try and keep the vendors on for a few years so we can learn the ropes and just understand the true intricacies and understand the culture around a race. And then, you know, we try and identify areas where we can add value to it, and that's not always apparent straight up front. That takes some time. You need to understand, you know, where you might be able to put your thumbprint on it and improve the athlete experience. It's always about making things better. You know, we don't try and make things worse for people. And I know that there's a fear that with scale things change, but I think that's inevitable in some respects anyway. As with a sport that's growing as quickly as ultra trail running is, there are going to be more races that are there are going to grow inevitably. And I think with players like us coming into this space, you know, we can put our thumbprints on it around, you know, and typically quite often it's around the edges. Like what I've seen in my experience in the space is that typically the smaller, you know, owner operator type event does an exceptional job between the start line and the finish line. And it's the stuff around the edges that we can often add some value to. You know, like at Ultra Trail Australia, you know, we've got a merchandise team here, and we added a merch program around the event, which went really well. People loved it. You know, they wanted to buy a high quality range of running gear that was branded with the event, and, you know, we got great feedback on that. So, you know, we have a marketing team that's got access to, you know, a database of millions of athletes around the world, and, you know, we can cross promote things and help grow the event. So there's a whole range of stuff, but again, it's baby steps. So it's look and learn, understand the culture, and, you know, and then gradually change stuff.
Well, you started to answer my next question is what's different, and I guess when is it different for the end user, so you can put yourself in a position of somebody who has been to Ultra Trail Australia or Terraware. I've at least gone to both of those for year after year after year, and there's an ownership change. Like, what are they going to notice when they go there?
So hopefully they still see the previous owner around, because that's always the intention. And, you know, we've got Tim and Paul here at Tarawera Ultra, and Tom and Lena in Ultra Trail Australia, and they'll stay on for a few years, because inevitably these events become inextricably connected with the owner, and they're part of the DNA, and you don't want to lose that. And then outside that, in year one, you might not see a lot of change. And then gradually you might see a merch program appear. You might see some new sponsors come on board. You might see the experience around the event venue evolve. So, you know, I'll give you a great example. So I ran the CCC last year at UTMB.
Yeah.
And I was there early in the week, and I was watching people cross the finish line of the TDS, which is one of the earlier races in the week. And as you'd be aware, and most people are, that the finish line of the trail running races, you know, friends and family typically run down the finish line with the athlete. And I had my, you know, my Ironman hat on. I was looking at that going, geez, it looks a bit messy. The people really need to, share that finish line experience with, their friends and family. Because an Ironman, it's different. For us, it's the athlete's moment. So I was thinking maybe that's something we could evolve in time, but give that some thought. And then when I ran the CCC, I had a very long, tough day, and I only got through that race because my wife, who was there supporting me at the 60k mark when I was ready to pull the plug, and I'd been throwing up all day. I was an absolute mess. She sat me down and I said, I'm done. And she said, no, just give yourself half an hour before you pull your race bib off. Just have a rest, lie down. She wasn't forcing me back out there, but then, I had a rest and then got some food. And finally, an hour and a half later, I stumbled out the door and finished. And the only reason I finished that race is because she was part of that. And then, so coming into the finish line at God knows what time in the morning, there was virtually no one there at about 4 a.m. And I grabbed her and I said, come down the finish sheet with me. And that was a really cool part of the experience because I wouldn't have finished that event without her support. And so that changed, this is why I'm sort of talking about looking and learning and understanding the culture before you come in with your changes. So that was really cool. But then the experience post crossing the finish line, I felt could do, in time with something. There's no finisher medal at UTMB races. That once you cross that line, you sort of just spat out into an open, courtyard type area. So, Ironman, I think, does a good job of that experience when you cross the finish line, that moment with the volunteer, with the medal, with the towel, through the recovery, handed back to your family type thing. I think that's a really key part of finishing your Ironman experience. And maybe some learnings from that we could transition into ultra trail running over time.
I think that perspective is a really good one to have, to actually go and put your money where your mouth is, or put your body where your mouth is. I guess that'd be the better analogy. Like put your puke right where your mouth is in your case, right? Go out and experience the races, and you dove in with, literally with both feet going into CCC at the UTMB races, because that's one of the, that's obviously the mecca. But to do that offers the ultimate perspective, because you can have all of your other previous experience from other sports, but like knowing the culture of the sport that you're coming into, or the culture of a new sport, I think is so kind of incredibly valuable. Let's pivot to North America a little bit, because I'm gonna be a homer. I'm gonna be a go USA, Team USA here. I, I want to peel the curtain back a little bit on what you think, or what might be your Ironman strategy for North American events that exist, or that you're going to kind of put on the ground. Can you give us a perspective of that landscape?
Yeah, so I look after, obviously I run the Oceania events and look after our global strategy. And one thing I would say is that the restriction, or the way the US market is structured, with the pretty tight capacity constraints on events, with forestry service, park service capacity restrictions, make it a very fragmented market. And you've got Western States with 396 or whatever it is, athletes, and I think the biggest 100-mile race might have about 700 athletes. So, for a company like ours, which is focused on athletes' A races and delivering exceptional experiences at your peak event for the year, in the scale environment, that's what we're good at. So that's what we focus on. How you translate that into a market which is really fragmented and small is a nut we are yet to crack, and haven't yet formulated where we're going to focus. And so, aside from the scale issue, you've then got the ownership side of things as well. And I mean, clearly, a race like Western States, which has been owned by a committee and effectively by the community for since the dawn of ultra trail running, is it's not on the table for discussion. It's just not something that committee is ever going to be entertained handing over to a corporate. So you've got to be realistic around where your aspirations are, and what that might look like. But Ultra Trail Australia has 8,000 athletes, which I think makes it the second largest trail running festival in the world after UTMB. And Tarawera in New Zealand has this year, or coming up next February, it'll have about 3,500. So those are the types of scale events that we want to focus on. And quite how we transition that into the US is, as I say, is a work in progress.
It's always scaling in the US is always problematic for races because, as you mentioned, you can't scale within the race itself. You have to scale with more and more footprints, and with more and more footprints become more like just you have to double, triple, quadruple your infrastructure. And but I don't know. In terms of I don't so to be honest, I don't know if I can kind of like take that at face value because I still see Iron Man because I know Andrew and I know how you guys work, right? Andrew's your CEO. I know how you guys view growth and opportunity, and it's not simply a numbers game for Iron Man in a lot of cases. That's a big part of it. Totally agree. But there's also like capstone type events
Yeah,
that
true.
help build the brand. And the one that I'll always put out there is like Leadville, right?
Hmm.
Leadville has the exact same story as Western States. It's been a race since the dawn of time. It's one of the marquee events. There's absolutely no reason for the previous management to like turn it over to another organization, yet it changed hands when Lifetime Fitness brought it in, and Lifetime Fitness brought it in for a completely different reason. We're not going to get into that on this podcast, but for a completely
Yeah.
different reason than it was originally started. You Iron Man is not Lifetime, but there's a parallel there where I could see Iron Man looking at marquee types of events just to have that beacon, right? Just to have that beacon of light for people to look to.
Yeah, look, yeah, I think you're right, and I'm not going to deny that. If an iconic event, popped up and it was, there was an opportunity, then sure, we'd absolutely take a look at it. But you still got to build the model behind it, and it's, as a global company, we still are formulating how this all sort of stitches together. And at the end of the day, whether you've got aspirations around building a series or a brand similar to like we have with the Ironman product, you still, each and every individual race has still got to stand on its own 2 feet as a great experience and a great product. And Kona's obviously does that at the top end of that, and we're doing that in the mountain bike space. So we bought the Cape Epic a few years ago with a stage race there, and that's obviously an iconic event, and we're now looking at how we leverage that to grow our footprint in mountain biking. So like I'm not saying that we don't have aspirations in the US, because we do, but quite how those are formulated yet is still a work in progress.
Yeah, and in an effort of full disclosure for the listeners, and listeners will know I'm all about full disclosure here. CTS had a B2B business to business relationship with Cape Epic before Ironman took it over and after Ironman took it over, and I helped kind of broker then brokers sounds like way too overcomplicated. I helped manage the deal before, then kind of like during the transition. So I have a little bit of like inside knowledge on it, and some of my connection with you has to do with that relationship. But let's get back to Ultra Trail Australia because it is a marquee event worldwide. You mentioned 8,000 athletes,
Yep.
which I didn't know that. I didn't think it was that big. I knew it was big. I didn't think it was that big. What's the geographic distribution of those athletes?
Yeah, so there's about, for that one, 25%, it's now 20% international, and then there's about another 30% interstate, so coming from outside New South Wales, from within Australia, and then the rest are from intrastate, so from New South Wales.
So quite an eclectic group. And is that any different than Tarawera?
Tarawera's got a higher proportion of international athletes, so it's 40% international. And New Zealand's a small country, and people treat it as a bit of a bucket list destination. So a lot of our events here in that sort of bigger international brand scale rely a lot on international travellers coming into as a reason to come to the country. Part of our sort of strategy is around thinking about ourselves as a type of tourism company. So while we're still an authentic, experience driven event company, a lot of our stuff, particularly on this end of the world, relies on people using events as an excuse to go and see a new destination.
100% adventure tourism, right? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
huge industry right now. You mentioned that Tarawera is a bucket list event for people, and that's certainly been the case with a lot of my everyday athletes and also a lot of my elite athletes. I've always been really impressed on the quality of the elite fields that you're able to bring in. And let me put an asterisk by that. And that's not to say that it always has the best elite field. Those are incredibly difficult to pull off. but I'm impressed because of the location and the timing, because it's hard to get those athletes out there. What is you guys' philosophy on how important or unimportant putting together those elite fields are?
Yeah, look, it's fundamental, particularly during the early stages of race development. And we obviously can't take credit for this, but the previous owners of Te Rawera, Tim and Paul, did a great job. And I don't know if you know Paul Charteris, but he was sort of one of the original founders of trail running down this end of the world. And he was part of the founding membership of the Ultra Trail World Tour, and he's run Western States and is pretty plugged into the ultra trail community. And so it's through those relationships that he formed with both other event organisers and elite athletes that he's managed to persuade people to get on a plane for a 12 or 14 hour flight and then another drive, and at a time of year when you guys are in deep depths of winter. So he's done a fantastic job of that, which we're keeping him on in that sort of ambassador role to make sure we don't lose those relationships, and we transition them over time to our business.
Is that going to be something that you envision continues for both of those races, that like heritage of bringing elite athletes into it?
Absolutely, and it's critical for the success of any event. Like I think you've got to get the balance right. Some people can get too carried away with just being solely focused on the elite athlete component and think that that's going to be the answer to growth. But actually, our philosophy is twofold. Yes, you need to do that, but actually you need to get the grassroots athlete experience right from start to finish. And that's, mapping out everything from the first touch point you have with them through your marketing or comms, right through the pre-build-up process through to what happens on site at event and then what happens after, etc. So, that's all mapped out according to a brand strategy that we develop for each event. And so each touch point that we have with those athletes through that journey reflects what we're trying to achieve with the brand.
Yeah, and I always think you've gotten good exposure with the elite athletes that have gone there, because I think on the calendar, it's an advantageous time to put a high quality race out there because there's a little bit of a gap. But also, people like going to that area of the world and they like showing it off on their Instagram feeds and things like that, which kind of feeds into you guys' MO of being a destination race, right?
Yeah, and Te Rawera is not a. I mean, there's a miler and a 100K, but it's not known as it's not a mountainous miler, right? So, for an elite athlete who might be in their off season, yes, it's still a decent hit out, but it's not going to be a UTMB equivalent or something like that.
I love that. Athletes in their off season, they can run 100K. No problem at all. Okay. All right. We talked a little bit about the potential or lack thereof of Ironman kind of coming into North America, and I really appreciate the transparency on there. But I realize that Ironman is a bigger global brand. What does it look like? This is going to be you could take the rest of the podcast to answer this question. What does it look like internationally? Like, where do you guys want to have trail running footprints across the entire globe?
Yeah, good question. So, just backing up a little bit to the state of the sport globally, I guess, given its really phenomenal growth, you'd have to say that structurally it's still very fragmented. So there's lots of different series. There's the Ultra Trail World Series, there's the Golden Trail Running Series, there's what the Spartan guys are doing. There's lots of stuff happening and lots of people trying to find their space, I guess. So that's at the top level. And then I guess to answer your question more directly, we think that part of the value we can bring to this category is the fact that we have a global operating footprint. So, the 54 countries that we operate in give us a unique perspective on or ability to deliver races just about anywhere in the world. And so as we build our IP in this space and develop best practice, both, operations, marketing, sponsorship, all the rest of it, then we'll be looking for opportunities that we can add value to those races that we think might fit that approach. So again, it's still a work in progress for us. There's no finalised master plan here for what Ironman wants to do. At the stage, we own two biggest races down, the arse end of the world, you might say. So while we are looking and learning about the space, building our IP, and developing our relationships with other events and understanding who's who in the zoo and what races, might be a potential fit for our growth aspirations, then we'll continue to do just that, look and learn and look for opportunities.
Okay, I get this. I get the sense by like reading between the lines of that answer a little bit is that you've got these feelers out. You have a strategy. You have these feelers out. COVID probably threw a complete monkey wrench into any of those deals, wherever they were. But you're putting those feelers out, and you're gradually starting to like chip away at this strategy that you guys have come up with corporately. And I don't expect you to like take me into like the contract line by line item. That would be a really boring podcast. But to get a little bit more detail on it, like, does that mean you're going out and trying to acquire races that exist or build races that don't exist, or a combination of both of those?
A combination of both. Yeah. And
So, go ahead.
yeah, and so it is a process of still looking and learning. And I'd say that the philosophy is we want to do more in this space. We just, as the global structure plays out and there's different players coming and going and things happen, then we'll look for opportunities as they arise.
Well, and as you pointed out, right, trail running's still on this like hockey stick growth right now. But you and Ironman, I believe, are smart enough to realize that that's not always going to be the case, and you have to build things for 10 or 20 years from now, not for 1 or 2 years.
100%. And look, if we may take a view that there's some areas that we want to do organic growth or new greenfield development of races. So, one of our my European counterpart, we've launched a multi-sport type festival in Andorra, and that's going to have an ultra run as part of that over the course of 3 or 4 weeks. And there'll be a mountain bike race and an Ironman 70.3, and then a trail run, and spread over a month. We think there might be some opportunity there to great destination again. So there's a whole lot of ingredients that obviously go to making great events, and destination's one of them, as well as a great course and all the rest of it. So
Were you pretty close to like getting any of those deals done before COVID? Did it really throw a monkey wrench in the system?
oh look, yeah, I mean COVID's no doubt slowed a whole lot of stuff down, and I've lost count of how many races we've cancelled globally now. I think it's up over 200. In our region, I think we're up at 12 now. We've cancelled. Just last week we cancelled another Ironman. We cancelled a run in Melbourne. Week before that, we cancelled City to Surf, the world's largest fun run. 85,000 people in Sydney over a 14k City to Bondi distance. So, and the Noosa Triathlon, world's largest standard distance Olympic triathlon, fell that week as well, and Ultra Trail Australia. So we lost over 100,000 athletes in 1 week 2 weeks ago.
That is so huge.
Yeah. So it's fair to say that that's where the focus of the business has been in the last, since the COVID crisis. But look, I think there's light at the end of the tunnel now, and we managed to get a Ironman 70.3 away in Australia last weekend. We got away, I think, 3 or 4 races in Europe the weekend before. We've got another one coming up, another 2 races globally. I think this weekend we'll get up, and then next weekend after that we've got Ironman Cairns, which should get up. So I think hopefully we're moving to a mindset where we're learning to live with this virus and putting in place safety measures around events that mean they can still proceed in spite of various levels of outbreaks or COVID health restrictions.
I promised before we got on the air that we weren't going to talk too much about COVID, but since we're on this subject, I actually am going to bring a little bit of a bridge that is a little bit more pertinent to Ironman's growth in the sport. And this piggybacks off of a podcast that I did with the president of ITRA, Bob Crowley, several weeks ago. And he knows the space really well. And I share this opinion with him where he was describing the post-COVID landscape as one where there are just going to be a lot of smaller trail and ultra running organizations and races that just go out of business. They just can't weather the storm. They're just not built for it. They're going to get bored with it. They don't want to deal with whatever the tail of COVID is, and they're just out. And then you combine that with trail and ultra running still growing. It's still got hockey stick growth, still exponential growth. Those two things combined make for a void that is going to be filled. And one of the ways that that void is going to be filled is with larger organizations like you, with Spartan coming in, starting races and buying races. Is that something that's kind of like in your calculus to kind of like weather this a little bit and then see what the landscape looks like on the other side?
Yeah, a little bit, although I wouldn't entirely, like I fully agree that there will be some operators that can't weather the storm. But the thing about events is that there's such low barriers to entry. You know,
Mm, yeah.
anyone who can come up with an idea, a concept, can off the shelf, they can get a registration system, they can build a website in a day, they can apply for a permit from the Forestry Service and the local council, and they're pretty much in business. So I suspect that some of the void will be filled by whether it's the same people or new people coming back after perhaps a period of hibernation and saying, you know what, we're going to give this another go. Because one thing we are sure about is that there will be increased demand in a post-COVID, well, not post-COVID, because or a learning to live with COVID world. There will be a lot of demand, and we're seeing that already with races that we are managing to get away. That athletes want to race again, and so and I think that's going to be really, really strong in 21.
Well, you probably share this opinion. I've been like drum on this recently with a bunch of my colleagues. Trail running is perfectly set up to be the first mass participation sport that is at full capacity during during the tail end of this pandemic, however long it lasts, 4 years or 5 years or whatever that is. I mean, it's perfectly set up. You can spread out.
Yep.
It's got a really cool culture. People from the huge mass participation events, like all the ones that you were mentioning that you just had to cancel, they want to go to smaller venues, stay a little bit closer to home. And trail running and ultra running has that right concoction of events to where they can hopefully bring more people into the sport that are looking for an outlet.
Absolutely. So you may see more smaller races pop up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You
Okay.
know, yeah.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. I'm going to press you, and I'm going to peel the curtain back a little bit more. Once again,
Here we
I
go.
know this a lot, and you could tell me after the fact that you want to delete any of this stuff.
Okay.
I'm more than happy to do it. But I want to what I'm trying to do is personally for myself, but I also think the listeners are curious. Like 2 or 3 years from now, like if you were just to be able to immediately fast forward and get your way, get Dave's way or Ironman's way, like what does the footprint look like in terms of Ironman's trail running footprint?
Yeah, look, that's a really hard one to answer. I'm not trying to dodge a question here. The reality is, let me put it this way: we've created a successful global brand with the Ironman product. We're looking at, we own the Rock and Roll series, and that's a brand that we're trying to add some value to and evolve over time. And so I think this concept of us having a role in something global, with our operational footprint and our scale and size, is of interest. Now, what that looks like, whether we do it on our own, whether we're partnering with people, I'm not sure. But what I do know is I think we've got something to add in this space. I think we can help the sport. And I know that some of your listeners might laugh at that and go, you guys are the big bad corporate, and I love my local race. And I think the way I view it is that as the sport grows, there's going to be a role for lots of different types of events and players in this space, and there will always be a space for the local, smaller, ultra trail running event. And if that's your cup of tea and that's where you want to stay, and you may pay a lower entry fee, I don't know, whatever the difference is that spins your wheels, it might be just with the people from your local community that you like running with, then that's great. Those races will continue, and there's a role for those. What I'm saying is, I guess there's also a role for something perhaps of a slightly different scale that stitches stuff together globally. And there's been a couple of plays at that already with the Ultra Trail World Tour, and UTMB is obviously the biggest at the moment in terms of scale and I guess profile. You could argue the toss whether it's Western States or UTMB, but two quite different kettles of fish, and they illustrate, I guess, the fragmented nature of the sport and the different philosophies that go into it. But I've been to UTMB twice now, and I think it's great. I mean, for me as a runner, that's doing a race of those sort of durations and distance with a large number of people in the big show it works for me personally. I think it's great. That start line experience, at UTMB is one of the world's best start line experiences of any sport. It's phenomenal. But as I say, there's also a role for the smaller races. So I'm not sure that answers your question.
No. I get it. You're not trying to dodge it. I know that you can't like totally predict the future. And trust me, I mean, I've been in those types of strategy sessions and asked ourselves, what's our 3-year strategy? And those are really hard. To kind of, you guys are still a business with real capital constraints and real people constraints. And as COVID is illustrating, real environmental constraints that are kind of like placed on you. So I get it that there's not unlimited amounts of everything, that you can just kind of do what you want. But I will echo your concern as like, not concern, but your comment as a member of the community, that I feel it's good for the sport to have the diversity of small races that are run by, mom and pop, one person, two person, they'll always be run that way. Races that are kind of organized into like regional clusters of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then bigger global organizations like you and Spartan and whoever else kind of comes along, because that diversity is good. You can pick wherever you want to go. If you don't like this experience, you can go over to that experience, and that's good for the economy of the sport as a whole. That's good for the athletes at the end of the day. It's good kind of up and down the chain, all the manufacturers and things like that have that diversity. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, I guess is what I'm saying.
No, I 100% agree. And I guess what we try to do at that sort of top scale end is we try to take the best bits of what a sort of more localized event has, and that's putting a face on the event, and personalizing it, and because what you find is, like, in the like the 100 staff we have in our region, they are just as passionate about events as the ma and pa operator. You don't come into this industry and work in Ironman or Spartan or whoever unless you love what you're doing, because it's hard. It's bloody hard work. It's just as hard work. I've done the small, owner operator thing in the event space. I know what it's like, and I work just as hard today, and I'm just as passionate today in my role as I was back then. And you do it because you love it. And you might have, to apologise because we're a business, and actually, we are a for-profit entity, but I think that drives a certain level of sharpness and efficiency around making sure you nail the athlete experience. But my team we love it when we get our athlete satisfaction survey results back. That's our measure of whether we've nailed a race, not how much money we've made. And so that the team get out of bed every day and give it 100% to create the best athlete experience we can. And that's what motivates and drives us. And I think that at the scale end will translate into a good thing for ultra trail running in the long term.
I'm familiar with those athlete satisfaction surveys because I've had several athletes that have taken them, and I've taken them myself. Let's set this up a little bit. How long has Ironman been doing that within the Ironman distance or the Ironman, like the Ironman races? Ballpark.
I'd say, I'm guessing, but it's well pre my time. That'd be 10, 15 years, if not longer. Yeah.
A long time is kind of what I'm getting at. And typical customer satisfaction survey, tell us about this, tell us about that, what can we improve, all this other stuff. Is that something that you implemented with Ultra Trail Australia and with Tarawera?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what is so you've seen both kind of sets of feedback or types of feedback from the triathlons that have been more established within your organization, and the trail races that you took over, that you kind of implemented a consumer satisfaction survey or customer satisfaction survey. What's the difference between the two, or is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer whether there's a difference, but I guess, like I would say, I mean, Ultra Trail Australia last year in the 2019 edition was the second highest score on overall satisfaction globally of any event in the portfolio.
Wow. And
I mean, our team here absolutely live and breathe these stats. So I don't want to start scouting about Oceania, but last year we won best overall Ironman, I think it was, best 70.3, best marathon, and best ultra trail event, and best mountain bike event, I think it was. So, we live and breathe these, and again, it comes back to that customer experience. So, trying to deliver those to the best way we can is what we're about and what we love doing. And so whether there's a difference between ultra trail running and Ironman depends on the circumstances around the event and what's happening in the cycle of its growth and development. But yeah.
Well, as you know, the customers are always right, and they will always tell you. They'll tell
Oh
you
yeah.
get it wrong for certain. They'll also tell you when you get it right. And so I always think that those customer satisfaction surveys are usually an overinflated view of what you've got wrong and underinflated view of what you've got right. And you've got to sift through that. We've done this within our organization too, and this is completely satiating my own curiosity. There's probably very little value to the audience out there, but my podcast, I'll do whatever I want to do. What's your hero metrics or metrics off of those surveys? Like the one or two questions that you really focus in on?
The key one is rate your overall satisfaction.
Okay.
And what we do is say we scale of 1 to 5. So 5 is outstanding, 4 is I loved it, 3 is average, whatever. So we total up the 4 and the number of people who tick the 4 and 5 boxes, and then that we sum that out of 100%. And that's how we say that's our sort of benchmark rating that we use. So last year, Ultra Trail Australia, 98% of people ticked box 4 or 5.
That's good.
For overall satisfaction.
And that's the one thing that rises to the top, just what your overall satisfaction is. Huh?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that sits under that with courses and aid stations and all the rest of it, but that's the metric.
We use the cliche. This is peeling back a curtain on CTS a little bit. We use the cliche, and I think very valid. Would you recommend this to a friend? Because it's more of our camp product that we do this on, which is not dissimilar to your race product, but we look at it as is it good enough for somebody to say, hey, you guys need to go to this?
Yep. Yeah,
no,
that's another good rating system as well. So and like you say, when you get it wrong, you get told.
Definitely.
We learned pretty quickly that this image of the soulful trail runner who's in touch, with the community themselves and nature, and is very generous of spirit, which is generally describes most people, can disappear pretty quickly if you get something wrong in the race.
Well, and people have choice, right? I mean, we present a lot of times, when we think about areas that are growing, which trail running is, we think about it as something where you put anything up and the demand will immediately be satiated. But that might initially be true or not, probably initially true, but that's not true long term because people are going to have choice. People can kind of go anywhere. And if you're not putting up a high quality product, people will just go find something else.
That's it. And our priority is you just got to come back to the basis. The priority one is a safe race, right? So you just make sure, and learning safety around a ultra trail event is different than an Ironman event, for example, or a road marathon that we might operate. So it's been a place we've treated very carefully, and that's always number one. And then you go through the priorities after that and make sure course marking, aid station food. You get all you got. You can never take your eye off the basics with this, and start focusing on too much sponsorship or merch or whatever it might be, and you lose your way pretty quickly. So what's clear from our athlete, back to the survey results, is that you can peel away all the other stuff, but you have to get the basics right and deliver that to the best possible standard you can, and then you build around that.
That's a really intuitive approach. I can really appreciate that. I want to go a little bit back to your strategy, and I think I'm going to set you up for a lot of people that are going to ask for this job. So you mentioned that the way that Ironman found Trail Australia and Tarawera was just you going there, and you said, "It's an awesome event. Let's figure out how to be a part of this." I had a great experience there. Is that a way that you're going to use to scout other areas in the world? And I imagine if you say yes, you're going to get 100 resumes after this podcast airs.
Let me put it this way: it's certainly part of the equation, and I think you just can't beat first-hand experience. And I'm lucky enough in my current role that I do. And we have a team that affords me the opportunity that I don't have to be on the tools as much as I used to, and that I can turn up to a lot of our own races and do them and experience them, and provide feedback and put that athlete hat on. And like last year, I did about 8 of our events in our portfolio, just different races, and things are looking good the night before. The weather's good. The team are in good shape. If I can jump in, I will. And I think that's as we translate that to scouting, I guess, for different opportunities in the future, then absolutely getting a first-hand runner's experience around what a race is like is important. But just part of the equation, I guess.
But what you're saying is you're filling that role internally because everybody wants to fill it. Everybody wants to go and the races themselves versus you putting out a job rec saying we're looking for this person, because you would get a lot of people apply for that job.
Yeah, that would be a great job, cruising around the world doing running races.
I'm giving you business ideas. I told you this is going to be mutually beneficial for both you and I. There's my contribution. I gave you a way to solve the scaling problem, is to hire for somebody that's sole job is to go around and do the races from a first-person athletic perspective and report back to you.
But I mean, I think in some respects, though, it's becomes, for the races that have been around for a while, self-determining, because the races that succeed and grow have to deliver a good athlete experience. So, by definition, if a race has got the brand has been successful and it is growing, there's only so many new customers you can fill in a pipe if you're tuning out, ones that are unhappy at the other end before a race, gets a bad rep and people don't, they stop coming. So you can sort of pick it just from the growth story around an event as well.
Okay. Well, if you want to, we'll put your email address in the show notes for the role. I'm going to push for this. I want to kind of leave I want to kind of like leave this podcast on kind of a discussion around elite athletes, because this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, and it's also something that I think Ironman has done impeccably well. And I don't say, and they haven't done it impeccably well just because they were the first and they've been around for the longest. Like, that's been an intentional, cultivated part of the Ironman brand, to bring in all these fantastic athletes from different disciplines and from Olympic distance triathlon to compete in Kona, the kind of the premier stage, year after year. And it's an awesome elite athletic event. And I think personally, this is me getting on a soapbox about elite athletics, I think that level of competition, when it's concentrated in that fashion, that's the thing that I want to focus on. Concentrated in that fashion, all on the same stage, the same people every year, year in and year out, competing for the exact same title. It brings the best out of everybody. That catapults and has catapulted Ironman into the stratosphere that it's in right now, or it's a big part of it. Trail and ultra running, despite ourselves, we have not been able to figure that out. As you mentioned, it's really fractured. And one of the ways it's really fractured that I don't think we spend enough time talking about is on the elite athlete competition. So you've seen it at Ironman. Let's wave Dave's magic wand. A lot of power in this podcast, by the way. Let's wave Dave's magic wand. Let's say, listen, we were going to do this in trail and ultra running. We want one big stage where everybody comes, everybody competes, and it's going to catapult the sport. Learning from the lessons of Ironman, what does that look like?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say it's necessarily given that the Ironman model is the only model that would work for ultra trail running. I mean, I think it's a model that has worked well for Ironman. Look, 100% agree, no doubt. I mean, Kona's the great showpiece of the sport and has been responsible for phenomenal growth. One sidebar comment, though, is that for 80% of athletes lining up on the start line of the 40 plus regular Ironmans around the world, no intention of trying to qualify for Kona. Yes, they might have heard about it through Kona. They're inspired by it, but they're there for their own personal journey and reason. That there is a key difference here, I think, in ultra trail running, is that I'd say there's a higher proportion of people doing ultra trail running for their own personal reasons and journeys rather than competing, if you like. So they're competing with themselves rather than their neighbor. You're laughing.
Trying to say the Ironman community is overly competitive with each other?
No.
Come on, you don't be a diplomat here.
Look, no, genuinely not for the. I think there's a proportional thing, right? It's a mixed bag, right? But I would say there's a higher proportion of people doing Ironman triathlons who, the first. Have you done an Ironman?
I have not done an Ironman. No.
Okay. The first question you do, if you say you've done an Ironman, the first question is, what was your time? Or marathon, what was your time? Right? if you say you've done Ultra Trail Australia, no one really cares about your time.
Yep.
Or, it's about, did you finish? What was your journey like? What were the people like along the way? It's quite a different culture. And I think that'll change a bit and the cultures always evolve over time. But sorry, we've gone down a rabbit hole here, but back to your question around what the right model is, maybe it's a tennis type model and there's a grand slam of four, sort of world events that stitch together, or, there's different ways you can do it. What I would say though is that I think the demands on athletes of regularly running, elite athletes, 100K or 100 mile or whatever the ultimate distance ends up being at that world level, you can't ask too much of people to run too often. And I think that's, part of the challenge of the fractured nature of the sport at the moment is that, elite athletes have this challenge of, do I go and race here for a bit of, limited prize money, but I've got an endorsement here. What's the coverage of this race like? Do I do, this because it's on the Ultra Show World Tour and I might get some points and that adds up towards the end of the year? It's all over the place, to be honest. So I think, how this evolves is yet to be seen. But there's no one single answer, I would say.
Yeah, and so there's going to be plenty of people that disagree with me, and that's fine. We can agree to disagree. There's no, love lost or anything like that. But I personally think the sport of trail ultra running is better served, at least at the elite level, to have some more, maybe not an ultimate point of concentration, but at least some more concentration where you get a bigger concentration of the best athletes competing on the biggest stages because of what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
They get so strung out throughout the year that it's hard to put together like a really marquee or beacon type of performance that everybody kind of gets attracted to. And that's sinisterly, because I'm in it for the health of the sport, right? I make my living coaching athletes in the sport. I think that's good for the health of the sport when you have those things, because the competition is just good for everybody.
100% agree.
So maybe Ironman can help with that. That's my calling to you, because you have first off, we're kind of joking because this is like self-serving for you as well. But I do think that with Ironman's kind of pedigree in creating elite sport, you have a blueprint, not the blueprint or the exact blueprint, but at least a blueprint to say, okay, here's how it could like potentially be shaped. And it doesn't have to look exactly like this, thing that we've built with Kona, but there's at least something there to draw from. And right now, as you now have the experience of even going to UTMB, there's really not a lot to draw from,
Yeah, and when you do get that sort of concentration of all the best athletes, it makes for spectacular viewing, and it's awesome. So and you'd have to argue that happens sort of 2, maybe 3 times a year at the moment. UTMB, Western States, and Leadville, Hard Rock. Maybe there's a few others around, but agreed.
Even then, though, like the number of people that can cross over between those two races, one, they're obviously like way different races, but the competitive landscape kind of almost makes them mutually exclusive. But that's always been just like a desire of mine to see more and more of, and nobody's going to be able to like flick a light switch and have like the magic answer. It's a gradual movement towards a concentration of elite level competition is the way that I would put it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be great for the sport, not just for the elite athletes and the profile and the ability for people to earn a decent living off it or whatever it might be. I think it's it's good for the overall growth of the sport and inspiring more people off the couch and into trail running.
Well, that's my subtle nudge for you to help with that.
Consider it done, Jason.
All right, there you go. Awesome. All right, Dave, I appreciate your time coming on the podcast today. Before we let you go, just on a personal note, since you're now like getting into this ultra marathon world, what's next for you? Like, what ultra are you either gonna like sinisterly scout out to like bring on board to the Ironman brand, or which one do you actually genuinely want to do once COVID's all done with?
Genuinely want to do. I was entered in the TDS this year, which I'm pretty disappointed about.
That's so hard. That race is so hard.
Yeah. So, but given we're still pretty much locked down away in little old New Zealand, there's a quite a well-known race here called the Kepler, which is a 60K run in the Southern Alps. which I did many years ago. Yes, I'm managed to get online and in the allotted time and get an entry. And so I'll be doing that in December, and then we'll see when these international borders open up and see what the future holds. But
well, if you're at TDS, I will be there, and I'll help you crew out. Look me up. We'll have to connect then. I love that race. I like TDS because you can watch and help athletes out at that race and still be a part of the UTMB CCC deal. It's hard to do UTMB and CCC at the same time. I crossed like the borders like 19 or 21 times or something like that, just driving my car like an idiot around the Alps. But TDS, the way that it's set up kind of early in the race, is great. You can do it, and once you're done, you can watch everything else, and it's cool.
Yeah, and we have an Ultra Trail World Tour meeting around the event, the last couple of years, so it works well. I've got to be up there anyway, so most of the people on the tour have go at some sort of race around UTMB. So yeah, it's good.
Awesome.
Great event.
Well, thanks again for your time. Before we leave, where can athletes kind of learn a little bit more about Tarawera and Ultra Trail Australia, or any of the other races that you're involved with?
Yeah, just Google Ultra Trail Australia, Tarawera Ultra Marathon down here, and once those borders get open, we would welcome your lovely North American audience to come down here and experience a bit of down under hospitality and see our beautiful countries.
It's cool. I've never been down there, but every single athlete that I've sent to either one of those races raves about it. They are the people that score fives or put down fives on athlete satisfaction surveys. They put 10 if they could put 10.
Well, the thing is that people think they're coming for the race and the course and the achievement of their goal, but what they always walk away from, and I take this philosophy across all our events, is the people. And I think Australians and New Zealanders do a pretty good job at welcoming people, and they walk away with the friendships and the connections and that kind of thing. So we put a lot of work into facilitating those opportunities for people, so that they walk away with some new friends.
Awesome. I hope people get to experience it, Dave. Thanks for your time again.
Thanks, Jason. Great to meet you.
Thanks again, Dave, for coming on the podcast. Thank you to all the listeners. Appreciate the heck out of each and every one of you. We will see you out on the trails.